All right, here we go. All right. So today we're going to talk about what I consider to be a very important topic, one that we have misconstrued and misled. It has been passed down from generation to generation the wrong way to do it. And I'm hoping today, through these scriptures, we'll get some light shed on the correct way to do it. And what we're going to talk about today is training up your child in the way that they should go. Because we got a lot that's going on out here in this world, a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion. There's more kids out there now popping pills, doing drugs, attempting suicide. And it's because they don't have an identity. They don't know who they are. They don't know whose they are. And we've lost that. We've lost that. We've been instructed to pass down our history, generation to generation, everlasting. And we haven't done that. And our history shows it. We went into bondage. We went into slavery. We've lost our way. We've lost our heritage. We've lost who we are. We lost our identity. And if we don't know who we are, how will our kids know who they are? And they, in turn, they're struggling. This generation is struggling. And they're having a hard time doing that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hmm? Oh, my bad, people. I know y'all waiting in the waiting room. Y'all forgive me if y'all sitting in the waiting room for a minute or two. But y'all just ping my wife and she'll let me know, keep me on track. All right. So we as humans are not programmed to sin. What do I mean by that? Adam was created in righteousness, meaning no sin was in him. He didn't know how to sin. He was in the garden and everything was good. Y'all said it was good. But then Hasatan, who was already on the scene, decided to make himself known. And he convinced Adam otherwise. When our kids are born, they're exposed to something sinister, something evil, something that changes their thought process. But we as parents have an opportunity to fine tune that thought process. For those of you with kids, who can say they taught their kids how to covet? Don't answer that. That's a rhetorical question. But it's one to think about nonetheless. Who taught your kids how to covet? Did they learn it from watching you? Did they learn it from watching someone else? Where did they get that from? Example, two kids, let's say two toddlers, or even better yet, two infants, two babes playing together. One has a toy, the other one doesn't. What happens? That's right. He takes it. I see it. I want it. He takes it. So where did that behavior come from? Are they repeating what they saw? The babes. We're talking 2, 3, 4 month old babies. Where did they get this behavior from? Could they have seen you do it? I doubt it. Well, the word tells us that we were fearfully and wonderfully made in the womb. And Yah is not going to create you hardwired to sin. So where did this come from? When a child comes out the womb, when they're born, they're exposed to something. They are exposed to something in this atmosphere, in this world. And until they are trained otherwise, that's why it's written in Proverbs, train up a child in the way that he should go. And when he's older, he won't depart from it. So training up a child involves constant instruction, guidance, discipline, and correction. Again, that is constant instruction, guidance, discipline, and correction. Now, as adults, we have these same principles in mind, and we went over them in the last Shabbat. Do y'all remember what those four principles were? DDPP, direction, yeah. Discipline. Provision, provision, and perfection. That's it. Direction, discipline, provision, and protection. As adults, we need that. And we need to give our kids instructions and discipline. Why? Because Proverbs tells us that whosoever loves discipline loves knowledge. Knowledge. What is knowledge? It's discernment, it's understanding, and it's wisdom. But what's the Hebrew word for knowledge? The Hebrew word for knowledge is da'at. Da'at. It is the Daleth, the Ayin, and the Tav. The Daleth is a door, a path, a way of life, movement. The Ayin is the eye, look, appearance, to see, understand, experience, to be seen, a fountain. And the Tav is a mark, a sign, an X or a cross, ownership, to seal, covenant, join two things together. So when you take these Hebrew letters and put them in the proper order, it is a way of life to see and understand covenant. A way of life to see and understand covenant. That's what knowledge is. So let's take a look at this in Hosea chapter 4. Hosea chapter 4. That is the very back of the Old Testament. You get to Matthew, you went too far. If you get to Micah, you went too far. If you're still ahead of Ezekiel, you didn't go far enough. All right. Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. We all there? All right, verse 6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to see, it shall be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy Elohim. I will also forget thy children. So now let's replace that word knowledge with what we just learned. My people are destroyed for a lack of a way of life to see and understand covenant. Because you rejected a way of life to see and understand covenant, I also will reject you from ministering as my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your Elohim, I myself also will forget your children. This is a state our children are in. We forgot covenant. We broke covenant. We ain't keeping covenant. And our children, they're suffering for it. And they don't even know why. Because of us breaking covenant, our children will be turned over to a strong delusion of this land. And you see it happening. They begin to view right as wrong, wrong is right. And it will seem very perfect to them. Why? Because everybody's doing it, right? Everybody's doing it. So it has to be right. Can't be wrong if everybody's doing it. God's not going to punish everybody, right? But wide is the road and narrow is the path. So what causes them to make a selfish choice? It's that question again. What causes our kids to make this selfish choice? Hasatan did something in the beginning with Adam. When he convinced him to eat that fruit, he ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil. Adam only knew good initially. Then he ate the fruit, and the rest is history. From that point on, what he knew, he inadvertently passed that on through his seed. We're part of that seed. And what he knew, we now know. It's in us too. That's why we have to train up our children so that when they are older, they won't depart. So when we come out the womb, we need to be shaped and trained in righteousness. What Yah did in the womb was absolutely perfect. It was absolute perfection. There was no sin or desire to sin in us. But when we came out the womb, when we were exposed to this atmosphere, this earth, something changed. I see. I want. I'm taking it. The same that we just demonstrated was the same thing that was in Hasatan before he fell from heaven. Look at Yah sitting upon that throne. That's a magnificent throne. I want one like that. Matter of fact, I'm gonna have one better than that, and I will ascend above him. Lightning flash. Saw Hasatan fall from heaven, fast as lightning. That's why we as parents got to train our kids. We have to. If we don't, we leave them to be exposed to the world, and what they know to be good, they'll stop doing. And they'll begin to operate in sin. Now, there's going to be some kids that are one-offs. They won't follow majority of the paths. They'll see everybody doing the wrong thing and they'll make a conscious decision. No, I ain't doing that. Mm-mm. Yeah, a lot of times, many of us may have been in that situation as a kid. You know right from wrong, and you have a choice to make. And for some reason, you choose to do right. But we as parents, we have to train them. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. The beginning of knowledge. A way of life to see and understand covenant. I keep saying this because this is something we have not instilled within our kids. We have not passed this down as we were instructed in the Bible from generation to generation. this covenant, it was lost. Without the fear of Yah, man's mind is left unrestrained in its carnal and sinful nature. If you don't train your child, the world will, the church will, and combined, they're going to present them, whether it be on the streets or in Sunday school, a lawless salvation that leads to more lawlessness. You, we, us, we're living in grace. You don't have to live by the law anymore. Jesus has brought us grace. He has forgiven our sins, past, present, and future. So don't worry about the law because your sins are forgiven. We're in grace now, and we're waiting for the rapture. But we also know that verse, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Church didn't teach you that one. So how do I train my child, Mr. Charles? I'm glad y'all asked me that. So in our adult years, we already learned in the last Shabbat, we need direction, discipline, provision, and protection. And toward the end of this, I'll give an example of that based on my own personal life and my own story to tell. But our kids, they need constant instruction, guidance, discipline, and correction. So let's talk about this constant instruction part. We're going to head to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. From Hosea, we are going backwards toward the beginning. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we're going to be going to start in verse 6. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. These instructions are constant instructions. And sometimes we got to use words. In other words, your lifestyle speaks volumes. Starting with putting the word in your heart, recalling scripture, or knowing where to find it until you can recall it. When you have your family time, at dinner, outside of dinner, talk about the word. Share it with your children. Ask them to name 10 trees in the Bible. There's 36 specific trees that's named. I don't know if anybody knew that, but ask them to name the 10 commandments. Who are the 12 tribes of Israel? Something simple that you can ask your kids because we have to train them early to be familiar with the Bible, to be familiar with our heritage. When walking about, tell the stories involving travel, such as the Good Samaritan, the Exodus from Egypt, the man who was lowered through a roof. Teach them about the man that fell asleep in school for your older kids when Paul was teaching, as the story, and he was speaking up past midnight. And there was a guy on the third floor sitting in a windowsill. He fell asleep and fell. That story's in Acts. But yeah, he lived, he didn't die. So Moses says in verse 8 and 9, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the post of thy house and on thy gates. These verses are to show that Yah's commands should be integrated in every part of your life. So, what does that mean? Let's break it down. The chapter of Deuteronomy, starting at verse 4, these verses are all part of what? Does anybody know? Somebody read verse 4, just the beginning.
Shema.
6 and 4. Mm-hmm. Say that again.
The Shema.
The Shema, yep. Verse 4 starts off, Hear, O Israel. That is the Shema. And when looked at through a Hebraic mindset, these verses are symbolic far beyond literal action of binding and writing. And we're going to break this verse down, verse 8. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand. That's living by his word in action. In a Hebrew thought, the hand represents action, deeds, and work. So to bind Yahuwah's commands on your hand is to let his word govern everything you do, your work, your conduct, your daily interactions. Every act that you perform should reflect obedience and faithfulness to Yahuwah. Colossians echoes the same principle where it says, and whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of Yeshua. That is Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. The second part of verse 8, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. Between your eyes, frontlets, guiding your thoughts and your perspective. The forehead or space between your eyes symbolizes your mind, your thoughts, and your perception. To bind the commands there is to keep Yahuwah's instructions continually before you, shaping your worldview, your moral reasoning, and even your intentions. So your way of seeing the world, making decisions, and discerning truth should be filtered through his word. Psalms 119 and 105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. This reflects not just external obedience, but internal alignment. The Torah written on the heart. Moving on to verse 9. And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house. This is bringing his presence into your home. The doorpost, or mezuzah in Hebrew, was the threshold. It's the line between the outside world and the home. By writing Yahuwah's words there, the household basically is declaring, this house belongs to Yah. All who enter and all who leave do so under his authority. His commands govern not only public and religious life, but family life, relationships, hospitality, your daily living. Even today, some of us have a mezuzah on the door frame. Anybody know what's inside the mezuzah? It is scripture, and it is the very scriptures we are going over. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9 is written inside on that mezuzah. It's a continual reminder of covenant identity. The last part of part 9, and on thy gates. This is extending his laws into the community. The gates of a city is where judgment, trade, and governance occurs. How do I know that the gate represents community? Because there's an example in Ruth. Let's go to Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. We are journeying towards the back of the Bible. Yes. Hmm? Joshua, Judges 3. Thank you, dear. Verse 1 says, and we're not going to go through this whole story, but it's an example of where the gates are and what the gate represents. Then Boaz went up to the gate and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Oh, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down, sitting at the gates. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother's Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. And the story goes on. But the point I'm trying to make here is this gate, it was in the community. So we're talking about extending Yah's laws into the community as well. So to write Yah's commands there is to ensure that justice, fairness, and righteousness flows through the community's public life, not just in our homes and in our private life. Yahuwah's word is meant to guide society as a whole. Our justice systems, business dealings, and leadership. We are definitely lacking that today. So these instructions are to permeate every facet of your existence. What you think, your forehead, what you do, your hands, where you live, the doorposts of your home, and how you govern the gates of your home. It's a picture of total integration, where faith is not a compartment of life, but it is the very framework. So Deuteronomy 6 and 6 sets the tone for what we're talking about here. These words that I command to you today shall be upon your heart. Once they are written there, Every other sphere within your life naturally follows. Okay, so those are all examples of constant instructions that need to be passed on to our kids. So let's talk about guidance. And here I got 4 scriptures to go over to talk about for guidance. And we're going to start with Psalms in the Old Testament and work our way to the New Testament because there's a pattern we need to catch. We're going to head over to Psalm 78, starting in verse 1. And we're going to go down to verse 4, and it reads, Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, shewing to the generations to come the praises of Yahweh and his strength and his wonderful works that he hath done. Particularly, we're focusing on verse 4. The verse states that the deeds of Yah should be told to future generations. Again, this is where we fail. Parents and elders are called to testify, not just to facts, but to the faithfulness of Yah. Instruction wasn't purely academic, it was relational and testimonial. Children are to learn who Yah is and not merely what he commands. When we're going to school, that's all we teach kids. These are the commandments. These are the commandments. These are the instructions. But we're not teaching them who is Yah. Teaching a child begins with storytelling. Like I said, when a child comes out the womb, they need to be trained. They may not be able to read, but they can understand when you're telling them a story. And that story should involve something in your life so that they can relate to it. Recounting the works and wonders of Yah in such a way that his reality becomes personal and active, alive. So let's head over to Proverbs now. Proverbs chapter 1. And we're going to read verse 8. My son, hear the instructions of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. Proverbs are like little parables. Sometimes you read them and you get it. And sometimes you read it and you just kind of scratch your head and say, okay, we're going to go on to the next one. Maybe it'll come back later. This particular parable or this particular proverb instructs the child to listen to their father's instructions and their mother's teaching. And we're going to focus on 2 words here: instruction and where it says, forsake not the law, also known as the Torah of thy mother. So we're focusing on instruction and law. Instruction in Hebrew, the word is musar. Musar. It means discipline, correction, and moral training. And we all know what law is Torah, divine instruction or guidance. Now, this particular proverb presents the family as the first classroom of Torah, and it should be from a child's perspective, because who else are they going to interact with? Who else are they going to see the most? When they come out the room, the household is their classroom. We are their teachers. So the combination of both father and mother working together is also a dual nature of Yah's own guidance for us. And what I mean by that is Yah is providing firm justice and at the same time, tender mercies. And for a lot of our households, the father was the firm justice and mom was the tender mercies. So a child has to listen. He has to listen. He or she has to listen. Shema. Not merely hear, but they need to be able to internalize and obey. Just as Israel was called to do the same thing in Deuteronomy chapter 6. So let's shift this over into the New Testament. We're heading to Ephesians chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6, Ephesians chapter 6. Deuteronomy, Ephesians chapter 6. You saying that? Verse 4. And it reads, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in their nurture and admonition of the master. Nurture and admonition. The scripture tells fathers not to provoke their children to anger. A lot of us, this guy, got that part wrong. I know I got that wrong. You're not supposed to bring your kids to anger, but instead bring them up with discipline and instruction from Yah. And in this simple verse here, Paul echoes both Deuteronomy and Proverbs. Fathers are to shepherd a child from growth, not by harshness, but by steady nurture. The focus and the discipline is in Yah, meaning all discipline and guidance must reflect the character and the heart of the Messiah, not merely human authority. And that's where a lot of us have done. We focus and flexed authority and not the characteristics of Yah when we discipline. So true training in Yahuwah's ways balances correction and with compassion. Correction with compassion. Correction with compassion. Firm in truth, but gentle in spirit. And now we move down to 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3. And we're going to be looking at verses 14 and 15. And it reads, but continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them, and that from a child thou hast known the holy scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith which is in Messiah, Yeshua. Who wrote Timothy? Paul. Paul wrote Timothy. Who's Paul talking to? That's a gimme. He's talking to Timothy. So these verses 14 and 15, it highlights the value of continuing in what has been learned from childhood through Torah. It also shows that learning can happen in an unequally yoked home. What do I mean by that? This verse shows that Timothy was taught the Hebrew scriptures by his mother and his grandmother. We can reference that by going to 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. And this is Paul again speaking to Timothy. When I call to remembrance the feigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother, Lois, and thy mother, Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also. Wherefore I put thee in remembrance that thou stir up the gift of Elohim, which is in thee, by the putting on of my hands. So Paul is letting it be known that Timothy learned, was passed down the information from his mother and his grandmother. So where was dad? How come he wasn't in the picture? Well, Timothy's father was a Greek. He was a Greek. How do we know that? Because it says so in Acts chapter 16. Let's go there. Acts chapter 16, verse 1. Acts 16 and verses 1 through 3 is where we'll get that clarification. Acts chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. Then came he to Derbe and Lystra, and behold, a certain disciple was there, named Timotheus, the son of a certain woman, which was a Jewess, that's his mother, Eunice, and believed, but his father was a Greek, which was well reported of by the brethren that were in Lystra and Iconium. Him would Paul have to go forth with him, and took and circumcised him because of the Jews which were in those quarters, for they knew all that his father was a Greek. So Timothy was grounded in the scriptures that he learned from his mom and his grandma. And the scriptures was not just information, but it was formation, the shaping, wisdom, discernment, and moral clarity. Paul said in Acts that he wanted this man to go with him. So Timothy had to be doing something right. When he learned what was passed down from generation grandma to generation mom to generation Timothy, it made a difference in his life. So the word didn't just make Timothy learned, it made him wise unto salvation, meaning it trained his heart to recognize and respond to the Redeemer when he revealed himself. So, with kids, when it comes to instruction and guidance, what I want you to take away from this, from these four scriptures. In Psalms 78, it's a teaching testimony. You pass down Yahuwah's works and wonders. 78 is a teaching testimony to pass down Yah's work and wonders. Proverbs is parental instructions, talking about discipline and Torah in the home. Parental instructions to talk about discipline and Torah in the home. Ephesians chapter 6 is nurture and correction. Train in the character of the Messiah. And 2 Timothy talks about early scriptural foundation. Early scriptural foundation. Because scripture shapes faith and wisdom. So from Moses to Paul, the pattern is consistent. Teach diligently with storytelling, scripture, and living examples. Train consistently with discipline that reflects Yah's nature. Model faith authentically so that children see Torah in action. Empower spiritually so that the next generation walks in covenant relationship, not just religious ritual. And here's the part that hit me when it comes to training up our kids: discipline and correction. This part I got way wrong. Way wrong. And majority of these scriptures we're going to be parking in the book of Proverbs. Discipline Yah's way was meant to be understood, not as harshness, but as a form of shaping a person's heart and choices so that they can walk wisely. And I'll say that again. Discipline done Yah's way was meant to be understood not as harshness, but as a form of shaping a person's heart and choices so they can walk wisely. So we're going to start off in Proverbs 13. Proverbs chapter 13. And we'll read verse 24. And we all know this one. He that spareth his rod, spoil a child. Now, and what the word says. The word says, he that spareth his rod hateth his son. But he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. This proverb says that those who love their children are diligent in disciplining them. The two words I want to focus on here are the two words that was wrongly passed down. Well, I ain't gonna say wrongly passed down. The explanation of them was wrongly passed down from generation to generation. And I'm talking the word rod and the word chasteneth or discipline. So the word rod in Hebrew is shevet. Shevet. It's literally a staff or a stick. Figuratively, it's the symbol of authority and guidance. It's also what the shepherds use when they're guiding their sheep. Discipline is the word musar. It's moral correction or instruction. Let me say that again. Discipline is moral, not physical. Moral correction or instruction. Now, this proverb contrasts neglect with active love. The rod here is not primarily about striking, but about exercising steady parental authority that corrects and directs. Corrects and directs. A shepherd used his rod more to guide and defend the flock than to injure it. Now, what was passed down to us was this. This is what we use the rod for. Yeah. Correction, discipline, physical discipline. And it's been passed down from Egypt on into slavery, out of slavery, on into today. This is the wrong type of discipline. We passed down the wrong inheritance. None of us should have inherited this type of discipline at all. Genuine love sets boundaries. A child without guidance drifts towards harm naturally on his own. Watch a baby. You leave them alone long enough, they're going to get into something. But loving discipline, that wasn't me, y'all. Lots of time don't want y'all to get y'all kids straight. But loving discipline, it steers them towards life. So a child left on his own will naturally gravitate toward what's wrong. So let's head over now to Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22 and 15. 22 and 15. That's 20, 22 and 15. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. This is another proverb that shows that discipline can drive foolishness from a child's heart. And I'm not talking physical, remember, it's moral correction. Every child starts with folly, immaturity, self centeredness. I see, I want, I take. We learned in the previous proverb that the rod of discipline is used for guidance and to defend. So in this proverb, it represents consistent correction that helps remove that folly before it hardens into character. This is where a lot of us parents got it wrong. We didn't use discipline and we let that folly continue because we thought it was funny. We thought it was cute. All of our friends laughed at it. We encouraged it. And then it hardened into their character and they grew up. And then we didn't like it anymore. And we became embarrassed. So training addresses not just behavior, but the heart's inclination. A parent's loving correction releases a child from the grip of foolish impulses. Next, let's go over to Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29 and verse 15. It says, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. Hmm. Discipline and reproof brings wisdom, but a child without guidance, left to his own devices, will eventually embarrass you. And again, the scripture talks about the balance, the rod being firm guidance, plus reproof, which is verbal instructions. Wisdom in a child grows when action and explanation work together. Wisdom in a child grows when action and explanation work together. That's correction coupled with conversation. What does that mean? Discipline without teaching makes resentment. Do this. Why? Because I said so. I ain't doing nothing. Teaching without discipline breeds rebellion. You need to do this. Now, don't make me count to 10. No, don't make me count 1, 2, 3. And the kid's like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I still ain't doing it. No discipline breeds rebellion. And then it grows. And that rebellion grows and it grows and it becomes their character. And when they're rebellious in the home, they're going to be rebellious out of the home because the home is where they learn. So putting both together, teaching and discipline, it cultivates wisdom in your child. Because not only understanding what they need to do, they're understanding why they need to do it. And a lot of times, we don't give our kids that. We pass down what was passed down from mama, daddy, and grandma and grandpa. Well, I got to do it because I said so. Sounds good as a parent because you ain't got to explain yourself. But to a child, you're not instilling the right principles in them. They're not getting the understanding. And when they don't understand, they're not going to do it. So finally, in Proverbs, let's go back to chapter 19. 19 and verse 18. And it says, chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. I don't like that version too much. It's King James, but the New King James Version says, chasten thy son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. This proverb talks about disciplining his son because there's hope. Never look at your kids and think they're hopeless. And definitely don't speak that they're hopeless because your words have life. But when you discipline your child, as the second part says, do not set your heart on his destruction. Don't discipline your kids to the point of destruction. Don't discipline your kids to where you break them and then they become hopeless. They think that they're a failure because they're not getting anything positive out of what you're saying to them, except for their failure. They're a nobody. They're a goof off, and every other negative connotation that comes out of a parent's mouth. Chastening and discipline in this point is the Hebrew word yasar. It is in the same sense of instructions early and consistently. Instruct your kids early as babes and then consistently. The second part of this proverb warns against both extremes, either neglect, which leads to ruin, or uncontrolled anger, which inevitably destroys a child's spirit. Those are things we don't want to do. But as parents, I can say, I've done that with my kids. I've messed up really bad. Discipline must be timely. It must be measured. And it has to be motivated by hope for restoration, not by frustration. Discipline has to be timely. It has to be measured. And it has to be measured by hope for restoration, not by frustration. That frustration part is what's been passed down. A lot of us were disciplined out of frustration because our parents didn't know what to do. And they just thought they beat it out of you. We, in turn, turned around and did the same thing. Passed down from generation to generation out of frustration, not knowing what to do, or where to turn, or who to turn to, out of frustration. That has to stop. We can't pass that down to our kids. We can't allow that to be passed down to our grandkids. We need to give better instructions. And just be.
Question for you.
Yes.
Once you've done that, and they are grown, you did your best, and you still end up with the very thing you're talking about, the frustration, the rebellion. How is that correct? So it doesn't pass down.
Okay, so the question is, once you've done your instructions and properly disciplined and corrected your child, and it yielded no results, how do you continue? How do you keep going forward? You press. You keep.
Once since you've already gone through the process of spanking them, when they're little and they're grown now,
Right.
So,
how do you correct?
Correct.
so once you've disciplined your kids as children and they're grown now, how do you correct it? You start off by, I made a mistake. You take responsibility. You don't delegate your mistakes. You don't make excuses for your mistakes, but you let your children know that what you taught them was wrong. What you passed down to them was wrong. And you begin to go through the process again and you explain, because a child without understanding is still going to be rebellious and confused.
Gone through that as well. And you still come up with that rebellious, and they're not wanting to accept what you said or what you're trying to teach them from this point on.
So if they're still rebellious after the fact, that's unforgiveness. That's where you get on your knees and you pray for them to forgive. You ask your child to forgive you. And at that point, it's up to them to forgive. And trust me, when you ask to forgive, that puts the ball in their hands. It's their choice at that point.
They see us,
Yeah.
I just tell them,
Yeah.
they need to see us living,
Yeah.
us change.
And that's where I was getting to. Once you ask for forgiveness, kids watch you. From the time they're babes to the time that you pass or they pass, whoever goes first. Bad as that sounds, but your lifestyle is a living example. Don't become a hypocrite and don't become a do as I say, not as I do. Because trust me, your kids are always watching you. They're watching your lifestyle, they're watching your words, they're watching your behavior, they're watching you in and out of the home, in front of and away from company. So if you're living one lifestyle in front of people and another lifestyle in the home, your kid's going to know that. And they're recording it. And unfortunately, your lifestyle is the curriculum for them to learn. Because what they see you do, they will repeat, they will mirror, they will in turn do the same thing. Like father, like son, like mother, like daughter.
Yeah, I think we as parents have to make that, have that conversation with our kids, because we're learning, if you know, you're the first one to make the word today. And we're gonna have to talk to our kids as adults, because our kids are adults, so obviously that's how we raise them, because that's how we were raised, you know. You get the belt, you know, Charles calls it vitamin L. You get the belt and that wasn't the way to do it, but that was the way you were taught. So we definitely, even at this point, have to take the time to apologize for the way that we raised them and explain what we should have done, and you understand that as a result of us not knowing better, that some of the decisions that we made, hopefully will prevent them from carrying it on with their kids. So they will do better with their own children, but it doesn't mean they're gonna receive it.
That's what I'm getting at,
Yeah.
because I can say I personally have did that, have
Okay.
done that,
Mhm.
and the regardless is there.
Mhm.
Yeah, and as you have spoken of, I have put them into the hands of the Most High,
Yeah,
but so my question is,
yeah, so you did what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Then it's ask for forgiveness and your life is ask for forgiveness and your lifestyle. Because even though you said these things and you've done these things, they're still watching you. They're still watching you and they're listening. Yeah.
Yes, and sometimes the unfortunately isn't enough, because you think about years of processing that pain.
Yeah.
Years of processing, my daddy made me feel this way, well, I felt this way growing up. It's not gonna dissipate because you're a father. It's a process of going through, them healing from what they went through. Even with me and Charles and raising our children, we have to keep in mind that they have to go through the process of understanding that you took responsibility for what you said or did, and that we took responsibility for what we say or do, and you tell them, but we also have to remember that our words of "I'm sorry" does not erase years of that behavior.
that's correct,
Yeah,
but also, when you, and this is what you spoke repeatedly, I
yeah,
mean, we also have to heal.
right, so
From
forgive yourself.
we have gone through,
From our past,
so that double,
it is, but
but I get what you understand,
we have to choose to break the
Yeah.
cycle
yeah,
and say that we will not, we know what we were taught, we did what we were taught. And then to say we were taught the wrong thing. I'm sure both my parents are gone at this point, so I can't even go back and say mom, dad, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But we can, our children are living, so we can go back to our kids at this point.
right,
Now that they've learned better, though they're all grown now, I'm sure they can remember many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't, some people may be laughing, they may be still processing pain and disappointment and hurt and even rejection from feeling that way, because I can imagine when I watch the movie Roots and we see how the whippings were in that time, that made me liken to what they felt like. It's like degrading, like it makes you feel like you're nothing. So we have to remember that words can be
Yeah.
spoken, but it doesn't mean that it goes deep into those areas of years of that kind of behavior. That you have to really, like I say, be consistent in your walk with the now that you know better, do better as an adult
Yeah.
parent, but at the same time, keep praying, asking y'all to soften the hardness of their heart in those areas where they sometimes that hardness is there because they blocked it for a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not because they don't want to hear you, but because, okay, it's gonna take me some time because that area has been blocked off because it hurt too much.
Mhm.
So we have to think about it from that perspective.
Yeah. All right. I got one more scripture and then I'll hit the parents and I'm done. So Hebrews chapter 12. The book for us. Hebrews chapter 12. God's discipline. And 11. So now, no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward, it yielded the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. New King James says, now no chastening for the present seems to be joyous, but grievous. Nope, it reads the same way, exercised thereby. The scripture, particularly, it acknowledges that discipline is painful at the time, which it normally is because really no one really likes it. But later, it yields righteousness and peace for those who have been trained. We're talking about Yah's correction to a parent's correction. Discipline may feel unpleasant, but it's the long-term fruit of righteousness and peace is what we're after. The purpose of correction, whether from Yah or from your parents, is formation. Formation of your heart, the formation of your mind, the formation of your thought process, not punishment. The purpose of correction is formation, not punishment. It's for growth and not grief. Again, this is the part I got wrong. I was on the other side of that spectrum. So, what do I want you to get out of this part of discipline and correction? Is in both Hebrew and New Covenant writings. The discipline, Musar, it's guided formation. Formation, forming. You're forming, you're molding, you're shaping your child. It involves boundaries that protect, correction that redirects, instruction that explains, consistency that builds trust, and love that gives the whole process meaning. Mm-hmm.
Boundaries that protect.
It involves boundaries that protect, correction that redirects, instruction that explains, consistency that builds trust, love that gives the process meaning. If we do all those things from birth to adulthood, our kids, in my opinion, I believe, wouldn't be going through what they're going through today. They wouldn't have the struggles that they have today because they would know not to depend on this world, not to chase after things of this world. They would know who their provider is, who their protector is, who they are, whose they are. They'd know Yah. And all this chaos that's happening in the world wouldn't affect them. So, parents, let's take a look at us. What are we doing? Let's go back to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Chapter 4, verse 9. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. And I'm going to read it, but I'm going to break it down too to get better insight. Only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life, but teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons. Now, this verse basically is telling parents to diligently remember what they have seen and make it known to their children and grandchildren. Because sometimes our kids won't pass things down. So we're going to take this verse and go comma to comma. Only take heed to thyself. So parents' first ministry is personal, to remain faithful, alert, and grounded in Yah's word. Children learn more from what they see than what they hear. The integrity of your walk authenticates your words.
Can you repeat that?
Mm-hmm. Which part you want me to repeat?
Children learn more. Yeah.
Children learn more from what they see than what they hear. The integrity of your walk authenticates your words. And the next section of that verse to the next comma, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forgetst the things which thine eyes have seen. So Israel had witnessed Yah's mighty acts. They witnessed the delivery from Egypt. They witnessed the fire on Mount Sinai. They witnessed the giving of the Torah and a whole lot of other things. For parents, this means remembering and retelling the works of Yah, making his reality visible in your everyday life. Everybody's got stories to share where Yah intervened, where Yah saved, where Yah provided. Were Yah protected? But do we share them with our kids all the time? Or do we say we was lucky? It was coincidental or something else. We give credit to someone else. We don't give credit where it belongs. Parents' training begins with remembrance. We have to rehearse Yah's faithfulness so our children can trust him. And how will that happen? Through our testimonies. If we don't speak about the goodness of Yah, the streets won't. The church will talk about his goodness in you giving. So how will our kids learn? Through our testimonies. We have to talk about it. Not really know that song. So the next part of that is teach them to your sons and your sons' sons. This is the generational part. Generational continuity. This is the part we messed up on. We didn't pass down the good stuff of Yah, generation to generation. We passed down the beatings and whoopings. We didn't pass the glory, the provision, the protection of Yah. We didn't pass that down. As a parent, we are both teacher and a bridge. Like I said, you hit your kids, and sometimes you have to be that bridge and teach your grandkids too, until your kids come on board. You have to ensure that faith and truth are not lost in transition. A lot of these kids today, they into a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. And there's so many different ways to get to heaven. There's so many different things you can do to be saved. There's so many other things that you can depend on. Lost continuity. It's only one way. So I said this earlier, but our lives, our lifestyles, it's a living curriculum that our children will study every single day. That we're alive, that they're alive. Because they're watching to make sure we walk in the walk and not just talking the talk. The lessons that we internalize becomes the legacy that they inherit. So we need to make sure that we are properly passing Yah down to our kids.
The legacy what?
The lessons that we as parents internalize become the legacy that our kids inherit. All right. One more verse. Let's go to Joshua. Joshua chapter 24. And we're going to be looking at verse 15. And it reads, And if it seem evil unto you to serve Yahweh, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the mighty ones which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the mighty ones of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. Joshua, in this story, he stands as both leader and parent within his household. And he's declaring his household's allegiance to Yah. Choose this day whom you will serve. Training a child involves intentional decision making, not drifting with culture or, for the most part, convenience. Parents set the spiritual tone of the home by their choices and priorities. What you prioritize, your children will too. If you're not prioritizing Yah, neither will your children. Your family follows what you worship. If Yah is central, his presence will define the atmosphere of the home. As for me and my house, Joshua is not delegating his leadership to someone else. He's taking personal accountability for his household's direction. It is a fatherly stance of stewardship. It's not coercion, but leadership by conviction. In those times, his house included both family, servants. The entire domain under his care was devoted to Yah. The next part of that verse is we will serve Yah. The Hebrew word for serve is avad. Avad. And it means to labor, worship, and serve, basically implying wholehearted devotion. It's not a churchy Sunday activity, but it's a lifestyle of covenant faithfulness. Parental leadership and training a child means modeling daily worship, showing by example what it looks like to serve Yah in work, in relationships, and in decisions. Okay, I got one more scripture, one more verse, and then I'm done. I promise. Titus chapter 2. It's the last one. Titus chapter 2. And we'll be going to verse 7 and 8. Titus chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. And it says, in all things, showing thyself a pattern of good works in doctrine, showing uncorruptness, gravity, sincerity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. Both of these verses encourage setting good examples in everything, showing integrity, seriousness, and sound speech and teaching. In these verses, Paul's talking to Titus. And his instructions to Titus also mirrors your parental calling, which is to be an example that your children can follow. Taking these verses section by section, show yourself a pattern of good works. A parent's life is the pattern that shapes the child's moral and spiritual formation. A parent's life. And remember, they're watching you from beginning to end. So even when they're out of the house, they may be coming back checking upon you or watching you, depending on how close they are, to see what you're doing, how you're living, to see what's changed, if anything's changed. Your character is the blueprint your children will use to build their own. And again, like mother, like daughter, like father, like son, sometimes kids don't know what to do. So they do what they see their parents do. The next part of that, in doctrine showing integrity and reverence. Teach truth with consistency and humility. A child will quickly perceive hypocrisy. Quickly. Integrity in belief and behavior nurtures trust and respect. And lastly, sound speech that cannot be condemned. Your parental speech as a parent should build up and instruct, never tear down. Every word that you speak becomes part of a child's internal dialogue about who they are and who Yah is. These kids today, like I said earlier, they're going through a lot. And sometimes we as parents didn't quite build up. We tore down. We told them they ain't nothing, or we may have heard, you ain't nothing, will never be anything, won't amount to anything. You ain't dog poop. We tore down. We didn't build up. And this internal dialogue plays in a child's mind, even when they get older. And when they get older, these words continue to play and continue to haunt because those words were never corrected, they were never healed, they were never processed out. And a lot of times during that tearing down, we didn't really explain properly who Yah was. Granted, majority of us were under the strong delusion, and we were worshiping the false God. But now that we know better, we have to do better. We have to tell, we have to correct. We have to correct in humility. We have to be humble, swallow our pride, and tell the truth. Once they know the truth, Yah does the rest. And it has to be continuous and constant. Words have creative power. They form identity, and parental training involves teaching through speech that reflects grace and truth. And that's what we get from Yah. Grace and truth. So from the Torah, Yahuwah's design for the parent is very clear. Live what you teach. Let faith be seen in your daily walk. Lead with conviction. Set the spiritual direction for your home. Model the pattern, which is embodying truth, wisdom, and integrity in front of your children. When all these are woven together, your home becomes a living sanctuary where your children don't just hear about Yahuwah's ways, they see them. So training your children should not be taught from the church perspective of Torah to grace, meaning they shouldn't be believing that they are under grace. But instead, from stone, when these words were written on tablets, to spirit, written on your heart. From external obedience to internal alignment. So that our thoughts, actions, homes, and communities all reflect Yah's covenant heart. Raising a child in the way they should go isn't just about discipline or instruction. It's about embodiment, remembrance, and example. So training up a child in the way he should go is not a single act of punishment or reward. It is the continual loving shaping of the will, the mind, and heart so that the child learns to choose the good on their own. That concludes what I have. We're a little bit over time, but I thank everybody for your time and your patience with me. And I said at the beginning, if y'all can just give me an additional 5 to 10 minutes, is that okay? I wanted to show how what we were talking about in the previous Shabbat, the discipline, the direction, provision, protection, how that showed up in my life and how it played out. Many of y'all don't know my story about how we got to Fort Worth. Our story, sorry, babe, thank you. How we got to Fort Worth, but my wife was in South Carolina and I was in Afghanistan deployed. And it was my third trip to Afghanistan. And I was like, hey, this ain't it. I'm done. I'm about to retire. And at that time, I didn't know Yahuwah. I didn't know Yeshua. All I knew was God and Jesus. But at that time, I wasn't praying to Jesus. I was talking directly to God. And I'm saying, God, this ain't it. This is my third time in Afghanistan. I'm tired of getting shot and bombed and all these doggone attacks happening. It's time to retire. But Georgia ain't it. At that time, we was in Valdosta, Georgia. And I'm like, God, I want to retire, but this ain't it. Where do I need to go? Where do I need to take my family? And at that time, I felt like God put in my heart Fort Worth. And now I ain't know nothing about Fort Worth. In my mind, I'm thinking, you trying to send me to an army base? What is Fort Worth? All I knew about Texas is where my family lived. Beaumont, Houston area, and Galveston, where I was born. That was it. That was my extent of knowledge of Texas and the capital. So I got a morale call and I called my wife. And I'm like, Pat, have you been thinking about where we're going to retire when I get out the military? And she was like, well, yeah. And I said, well, what have you been hearing? Have you been praying about it? She was like, yeah. She said, what'd you hear? What'd you hear? And I said, well, I heard Fort Worth. Not sure about that, but I heard Fort Worth. And she was like, and she starts screaming. She's jumping up and down, she's screaming, and I'm like, what the heck happened? I'm thinking something happened on the other end of the phone. And she's telling me that she prayed and God put in her spirit Texas A&M. Texas A&M, obviously in Texas, and they have a branch in Fort Worth. So that was confirmation on the direction where we needed to go. Direction. So now I have direction. Abraham, go. And he went. Charles, go. I went. I got back from my deployment and I'm thinking, okay, so how much time do I need to take off? Because I'm back. I done put in my papers for retirement. We had a lot going on back then between the two of us, me out processing the military, and we still needed a place to live. Texas ain't a tiny state, not a tiny state at all. And then Fort Worth is not that small either. So I'm like, yeah, well, God, how much time do I need to take? And God pressed in my heart, 7 days. 7 days. That don't sound right. But that's all I heard. So I filled up my leave to go search for a house. And I only put 7 days. So we pack up and we head out to Fort Worth to look for a house, find a house, and do everything in 7 days. Now we got to Fort Worth and we met up with one of our pastors from overseas. And he said, well, hey, you guys can stay with me until you find a place. And I'm like, okay, so it was good, catching up on old times and stuff. And he's like, well, Chuck, how much time you got? What you take, 30, 45 days, 60? And I'm like, no, 7. He said, 7? Boy, you ain't gonna find no house. I'm like, don't speak that in my life. He's like, but you cannot find a house in 7 of look. That's what I heard. I already prayed about this. And this is what I took. God said 7, I took 7. We're gonna do it. This part was discipline, trying to walk it out, walking out my faith, not listening to the world, not listening to man, but trusting that Yah's going to provide. So we had 7 days and we literally had to hit the ground running. So we're looking for this house. We get this young guy to help us out. And we're searching, we're searching. Pat gets a vision of the house. Have you ever tried to describe a vision to someone who has never seen it? It ain't the easiest thing at all. Look at the book of Revelations when he's trying to describe what he's seeing. Describing what no one else has seen is not an easy task. So she's trying to describe this house to us. And we're all running around. We're looking, me, my wife, my youngest son, we're all on our tablets trying to find a home. We got this young guy driving around and he's trying to help us. So we're trying to be disciplined in this. Now, Yah has already given us provision, gave us a house to stay in so that we didn't have to spend extra money. So we're looking. The guy who's helping us, he's pretty young. Every time we get to a stoplight, he pulls out his phone and he's pulling up his GPS because back then it wasn't widely available in cars, only in those luxury vehicles. So he get to a stoplight, he pull up his phone to get directions from his GPS, and then the light turned green, he put it down. So my wife and I, we looked at this, and she's like, we need to bless him. And I'm like, what do you mean? She was like, let's get him a GPS. Let's go buy him a Garmin. And I'm looking at her like she is out her mind. But you got to listen to your mate. She's a helpmeet for a reason. I didn't argue, not verbally. Didn't argue, but I went with it. I said, okay. So we gave provisions to this person. We blessed them. And God in turn blessed us. Pat gets another unction from Yah to pull up a website that the military uses when they're transitioning from base to base to look for houses. And making a long story short, she remembers the password. She logs onto the website, and of the houses that show up, all of them were overcast except for one. Only one had sunlight in the picture. And she's like, that's it. That's the house. That's it. And I'm like, good, call him. She's like, there's a guy. You call him. The guy should be talking to guys. At that point, that was me trying to delegate my authority. You call. And she was like, no, you call. This is your place. So I call him. And I'm like, hey, we see your house that's online, and we'd like to rent it. And he's like, yeah, sure. He's real friendly. He was a first sergeant. And coming to find out, he bought the place sight unseen, meaning he had never seen it, but he purchased it. And he was like, well, when can you be available to see it? I said, well, when are you available? And he says, well, tomorrow. This is Thursday. This is day 5. So tomorrow was Friday. I'm like, cool. What time do you get there? It's first thing in the morning. First thing in the morning, we all going down there together to walk with him through this house. We're all walking through this house for the first time, all of us together. Now, as soon as we walked in the house, guess who was there to greet Pat? The Ruach. She walked in and got a warm embrace. And it gives me chills right now just thinking about it. She got a warm embrace from the Ruach. And she was like, this is it. This is home. This is home. We're here. This is it. She didn't need to see the rest of the house. She knew that this is where Yah had for us to be. So, provision. He says, well, what do you guys need? Now, remember, I came there with nothing. Now, to rent a house, you typically need bank statements, you need money, you need all these other documents that they're going to ask for. He was like, no, don't worry about that. First and last month's rent? Oh, no, he cut it in half. Said, just give me this much. All the documents that we needed, he didn't ask for. And he finally asked, well, when do you need it? She's like, today? Today? Because it's Friday. This is day 6. Day 7, I need to be heading back. So day 6, we get a house. It's empty, no furniture. And he's like, do you have any furniture? You got, I said, no, I got to go back to our process. And he says, well, hey, I got a blow up mattress. I got some extra furniture that I can put in the house until your stuff gets here. When I say this guy was a blessing to us, Yah was providing provision. He gave us provision. And when I say we moved into this house, I retired out of the military months later, no job, still trying to figure out what I was going to do because I worked explosives. Now, working explosives, there's only 2 things you can do when you get out. EOD, y'all seen the Hurt Locker. I wasn't trying to do that. Or be a terrorist. Definitely wasn't trying to do that. So I had to do a 180-degree turn. Go to school. Now, I ain't got no job. But we started getting checks in the mail continually. Oh, you've overpaid this much for so long. Here's your rebate. Oh, we charged you too much for so long. Here's your rebate. Oh, we had a correction of errors in your account. And these checks were constantly coming in, providing income for us consistently. Yah's providing. He's providing. And then comes protection. A storm came through our neighborhood. Bad storm. I'm talking bad. It tore down trees. It decimated the neighborhood. And this is what I want to show you guys. It decimated the neighborhood. Trees torn down. Everything was destroyed. A lot of things were destroyed. Now, I'm not talking like a tornado that just flattened everything. But the whole neighborhood was in shambles, except for our property. Nothing on our property was really touched. The trees were still there. The house didn't lose not a single shingle. But all around us was chaos, complete and utter chaos. And I say that's Yah's protection. And I want to show this. And let me see if I can share my screen. This one. Share. All right. Can y'all online see that screen?
Not yet.
You say not yet?
Not yet. There it goes.
All right. Let's start here. So this is a neighborhood we lived in. And that house, that's the house we moved into. Now, this storm basically came through these two streets. And this is the direction the storm traveled. And why do I say it traveled in this direction? Because that is the direction that the trees were facing and lying down and broken when the storm came through. And this first picture is just showing people trying to leave the neighborhood after the storm. This is the side of the house. Now, these trees, they're not dry, withered. These trees are fresh, they're moist. You can see it's just, they're not splintered. And this was right on the edge. This is the neighbor's house. This is the front of our house. And you can see Pat and my youngest son there. And you can see in the background, these people are trying to clean up the rubbish. And these trees are in the streets. This is right next door to my house. This tree snapped and fell on the neighbor's house. And this is another view of that. This is where my property ended. This is where the neighbors started. And you can see going down the street. It's the other side of the house. This fence line here is where my backyard is. But the neighbors came together as a community to try to clean up. And like I said, you can see the pattern of trees because they're all laying down and they're going in this general direction. I'm not sure how these younger trees survive, but these bigger trees, they caught the wind. There's another picture there, me peeking out from the window. And then there is this video of me driving through the neighborhood, going in a direction. And you can see the destruction of this storm on the streets. As I go through the neighborhood. So this was back in 2017. Brother wasn't used to his windows fogging up. But as I'm driving around, you can see the destruction that went through this neighborhood. And like I said, all these broken trees, all this damage to people's cars, to homes, none of this touched our home. And this is protection. So through prayer, we got direction. We were disciplined enough to trust in Yah and not man, and to believe in Him. Through our faith, He provided provision. And through our continued faith, He provided protection. These are the things we were talking about in our last Shabbat. And these are these things we need to model and continue to model in our adult life. These things need to be instilled in our children. These stories need to be passed down to our children so they can see Yah operating in our lives, so they can know that Yah is real, that Yah protects, and that we are the apple of His eye. Because when you got stories like this to pass down from generation to generation, it brings trust. The kids begin to trust Yah. Our youngest son was here. He's experienced this. So he has a story to tell. He has a story to share. These are the things we can't forget. And then it just stops right here and starts over. But that is it. Thank you all for that extra time. Um, let's stop this recording.